Hey guys, tonight we're embarking on one of the most unexpected stories you'll ever hear before bed. Imagine yourself standing on a windswept plain, the grass swaying like waves beneath a vast, endless sky. The air hums with a peculiar stillness, broken only by the distant thrum of hoofbeats approaching from the horizon. Tonight you're about to follow in the footsteps, or rather hoofprints, of the legendary Mongol postal system. Yes, you heard that right. This isn't some sleepy tale about knights and castles. No, this is about how an empire of horse-riding warriors obsessed over something you'd probably never think about at bedtime: mail delivery. And believe me, they took it very, very seriously. So seriously, in fact, that you definitely wouldn't have survived a week in their world. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're already cozy, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight: city, country, or even just your couch. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself trudging through soft, shifting grasses that rise almost to your waist. The ground is firm beneath your feet, baked dry by the sun. Yet there's an unending sea of motion all around, the restless winds tugging at the grass, the distant calls of hawks circling above, and somewhere in the distance the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding the earth. You're not here to sightsee, though. You're here to understand why the Mongols, yes, those same fierce conquerors who once terrified half of Europe, became utterly obsessed with speed. It all began with Genghis Khan himself. While most rulers of the time were busy waging wars and collecting shiny crowns, he was sitting in his felt tent pondering something else entirely: how to move information faster than anyone else. Because in his mind, if news couldn't travel fast, then neither could armies. And if armies couldn't move swiftly, then empires would crumble. It's kind of like waiting for your Wi-Fi to load, but, you know, with more swords involved. And so, under the vast sky of the Mongolian steppe, a grand idea took root. A communication network so fast, so efficient, it would stretch across continents. Imagine it. Thousands of miles of nothingness, stitched together by an invisible thread of messages rushing from one outpost to the next. No emails, no texts, just leather-bound letters strapped to saddlebags and carried by men whose job titles basically translated to "Don't you dare get lost." You'd probably think this was just another quaint medieval curiosity, but no, this wasn't a gimmick. To the Mongols, delivering news wasn't optional. It was a weapon. You feel the wind shift tugging at your cloak, and you spot it on the horizon. A lone rider, hunched low over his horse, galloping hard toward you, the dust curling behind him like smoke from a wildfire. As he nears, you realize something odd. He isn't slowing down. With terrifying precision, he swerves around you, barely glancing your way, and continues into the distance. You can almost hear the frantic beat of his heart over the thunder of hooves. He doesn't stop to eat. He doesn't stop to sleep. He only stops to change horses. That was the rule. Deliver or die trying. No pressure, right? The Mongols believed speed was everything, and their obsession with it shaped not only their armies but their entire government. They needed to know where their enemies were. They needed to know which cities to siege next. They needed to know what was happening on the other side of the world, preferably yesterday. It might sound extreme, but in truth, they were ahead of their time. Today we rely on emails, instant messaging, and social media for our rapid news fixes. But the Mongols? They did it with horses, sweat, and a system so effective that even modern historians grudgingly admit it worked shockingly well. Some even call it the medieval internet, which honestly makes you wonder how many memes they could have sent if they had Instagram. As the sun dips low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, you begin to sense how deeply this obsession ran. You can almost hear the voices of the past whispering through the wind-swept grasses. Tales of riders who crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts, all to deliver a single message. And just when you think it can't get any more intense, you hear it. The distant clang of a bell, signaling another rider approaching from the east. The Mongols weren't just fast, they were relentless. And tonight you're going to follow their path. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and start walking toward the sound of those hoofbeats, ready to step deeper into a world where mail was sacred, speed was survival, and no one cared how tired you were. The night stretches out before you, filled with stories waiting to be told. And this is only the beginning. The wind continues to sweep across the open plains as you follow the fading hoofprints in the dirt, tracing the same route that countless riders had once thundered along centuries before. The air is crisp, tinged with the scent of earth and dry grass, and you can almost feel the weight of history pressing softly against your shoulders. Before long, you stumble upon something unusual on the horizon. A cluster of wooden structures, low to the ground but sturdy, with smoke curling lazily from their chimneys. You've arrived at one of the earliest outposts of what would soon become the backbone of the Mongol communication network. The yam. Ah yes, the yam. It's not a vegetable, though that would make for a rather delicious twist. No, the yam was the beating heart of Mongol logistics. An interconnected web of postal relay stations stretching across thousands of miles of territory, each one strategically placed to keep messages flowing as fast as possible. As you step closer, you notice how well organized everything is. Neatly arranged corrals hold dozens of horses, each carefully tended by handlers who seem to take their jobs with the solemnity of priests. The station itself hums with quiet activity. Cooks preparing meals, workers repairing saddles, and clerks recording the comings and goings of every single rider. The Mongols didn't invent this idea from scratch, of course. They were master adapters, borrowing from the best systems they encountered. The Chinese had sophisticated courier networks, and the Persians had established relay stations centuries earlier. But leave it to the Mongols to take a good idea and make it terrifyingly efficient. They built more stations, stocked them better, and placed them in locations that allowed for maximum speed. If Genghis Khan wanted a message sent from one corner of his empire to another, you can bet it arrived faster than the average pizza delivery today. You can't help but marvel at the sheer practicality of it all. Riders would gallop to a yam station, dismount, and immediately switch to a fresh horse, barely stopping to catch their breath before continuing on. The stations were stocked with supplies, not just food and horses, but even weapons in case of emergencies. And here's the real kicker. These stations weren't just waypoints for letters. They were nerve centers buzzing with information. Military orders, political decrees, trade deals, and even personal correspondence passed through here. The Mongols knew that controlling the flow of information meant controlling the empire. You pause for a moment, watching as a scribe carefully seals a scroll with wax, his hands steady and precise. There's something oddly soothing about the repetitive motions, the soft scratch of quill against parchment, the flicker of candlelight reflecting off metal tools. But don't be fooled by the calm atmosphere. Beneath the surface, this was a high-stakes operation. Riders were under strict orders to deliver their messages at all costs. Delays were not tolerated. And if a message went missing, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to be in that rider's boots. Mongol justice was swift, and let's face it, a bit too creative for your tastes. You walk through the station, trailing your fingers along the rough wooden walls, and you begin to understand why the system was so effective. It wasn't just about speed, it was about trust, discipline, and absolute dedication to the cause. Every person here played a role, no matter how small, in keeping the empire connected. And here's a strange little fact. Some of the station masters were women. Yes, in a world often dominated by men, there were records of female supervisors overseeing these crucial hubs. Turns out the Mongols were surprisingly pragmatic when it came to getting things done. If someone was competent, they got the job, regardless of gender. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard, and you notice a peculiar detail carved into the wooden beams above the stable doors. A symbol resembling a swirling knot, said to represent the eternal sky. It's a quiet reminder that every rider, every horse, every scroll was part of something far bigger than themselves. You can almost hear the distant hoofbeats again, drawing nearer with every passing moment. Somewhere out there, another rider races toward this very station, his heart pounding in rhythm with his steed's gallop. He knows that he carries more than just ink and parchment. He carries the fate of kingdoms. And as you stand there, surrounded by the scent of sweat, leather, and wood smoke, you can't help but smile. Because somehow, in the middle of this vast, empty steppe, the Mongols had created something utterly extraordinary. A network that never slept. A system that bridged the impossible. A world where even the wind seemed to carry whispers of distant news. And tonight you're just getting started. The soft light of dawn begins to creep over the horizon, bathing the landscape in pale gold as you continue along the ancient route, following the path that riders once knew by heart. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked grass, and every step you take feels like a slow drift deeper into another era. Before long, the dirt path beneath your feet begins to widen, merging with the traces of other well-worn trails. You've stumbled upon one of the oldest arteries of human movement, the Silk Road, or at least a branch of it. Long before Genghis Khan ever dreamed of building an empire, traders had been passing through these lands, their caravans laden with silk, spices, jewels, and sometimes the occasional live peacock. Because what's a medieval trade mission without exotic birds? The Mongols, ever the opportunists, saw the value in these ancient trade routes. They didn't need to carve out entirely new roads, they simply absorbed what was already there and refined it, like someone inheriting a beat-up old wagon and turning it into a sports car. The yam stations were placed along these well-established pathways, allowing the Mongols to piggyback on centuries of geography and commerce. As you walk along the route, you can almost hear the echoes of countless footsteps that came before. Merchants arguing over prices, camels groaning under the weight of cargo, and guards grumbling about the cold nights. This road was more than just dirt and stones. It was a lifeline connecting distant civilizations. But of course the Mongols weren't content with merely maintaining the status quo. They believed that speed was sacred, and that meant making the road system faster, smoother, and safer than it had ever been. You spot the remnants of stone markers along the trail, once used to guide riders and merchants alike, standing like quiet sentinels under the open sky. One of the more fascinating facts you pick up along the way is that the Mongols sometimes planted trees along the routes, not for aesthetics, though they did add a certain charm, but as navigational aids. Imagine that. A traveller riding across the barren steppe, spotting a line of trees stretching toward the horizon, knowing that shelter, food, and a fresh horse waited just ahead. You pause for a moment, imagining what it would feel like to gallop down this road at full speed, the wind whipping at your face, your only thought being to reach the next station before sunset. It's oddly thrilling, though you're also aware that your modern legs probably wouldn't survive more than 5 minutes in the saddle. And here's something that might surprise you. The Mongols didn't just use these roads for mail and military orders. They also transported luxury goods and valuable treasures through the very same system. Silk, porcelain, and even exotic animals travelled under the protection of the yam. It's a bit like discovering that your local postal service also moonlights as a high-end jewellery courier. As you continue your stroll, you stumble upon a weathered milestone, partially buried in the dirt, its carvings nearly faded away by time. You crouch down, brushing away the dust, and realize that it once marked the distance between two major yam stations. Another reminder that every detail of this system was carefully calculated. You can't help but grin at the sheer practicality of it all. While most medieval societies were busy building castles or debating theological minutiae, the Mongols were out here measuring distances with ruthless precision, ensuring that their messages could travel as swiftly as possible. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about the yam's efficiency. Some local rulers along the routes grew resentful of the Mongols' tight grip over communication and trade. You can almost hear their complaints echoing through the centuries, grumbling about taxes, regulations, and the occasional sassy postal rider who wouldn't even stop to chat. And yet, despite the occasional rebellion or logistical hiccup, the system endured. In fact, some historians still debate just how extensive the Mongol road network truly was. Some believe it stretched even farther than official records suggest, reaching into remote corners of Asia that few dared to explore. Others argue that it wasn't quite as seamless as it appeared on paper. As always, history leaves a few gaps for us to fill in with a little imagination. You glance around, taking in the empty landscape, and feel a strange connection to those long-forgotten riders and traders. They too once gazed at these same hills, watched these same sunrises, and wondered what news might be waiting just beyond the next bend in the road. And with that thought lingering in your mind, you step forward once more, following the trail toward the next story, the next secret, and the next echo of hoofbeats fading into the morning light. The sun climbs higher now, casting long streaks of warmth across the rolling grasslands as you make your way toward the next point in this peculiar journey. The ground here is smoother, flattened by the countless hooves and wheels that once carved out this well-worn route. You can almost hear the murmur of voices and the clatter of harnesses from centuries past, carried on the soft breeze. Ahead, nestled against a gentle slope, you spot another yam station. A bit larger this time, and clearly more fortified. As you approach, you see thick wooden fences enclosing the outpost, and several guards standing watch at its entrance, their eyes scanning the horizon. Though the station appears calm, it radiates the quiet tension of a place where no delay was ever tolerated. This is no ordinary rest stop. This is a relay point, one of the many crucial pit stops along the Mongol communication highway, designed for speed, security, and absolute efficiency. Inside, the station buzzes with activity. You watch as weary riders dismount, their faces streaked with dust and sweat. Without missing a beat, stable hands rush out to take the reins, leading the exhausted horses away and bringing forth fresh ones, already saddled and ready to dash off again. The entire process moves with the precision of clockwork. Here, you learn about the role of the Ertö, the system of relay posts that kept everything running. Each rider was allowed to travel only a set distance, roughly 25 to 40 miles, before they were required to switch horses or hand off their message to another courier. No exceptions. The goal was simple: keep the message moving, no matter what. And the Mongols were nothing if not committed to this goal. You overhear a conversation between two station clerks, laughing softly as they recount tales of riders pushing themselves to the brink, just to shave an extra hour off their time. There's even a whispered story about a messenger who, after breaking his leg in a fall, strapped himself to his horse and kept going, because apparently rest days weren't really a thing here. You chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Imagine your mail carrier showing up with a broken leg, still insisting they deliver your package before lunch. But beyond the humour, you begin to sense something profound in the air. These stations weren't just about delivering letters, they were about stitching together an empire. In a world without phones or internet, this network was the lifeline that kept the Mongol world united. You step inside the main hall of the station, where a roaring fire crackles in the hearth. Riders gather around the warmth, sharing bowls of steaming broth and chunks of bread. Their conversations a quiet hum of languages from across the empire: Mongolian, Turkic, Persian, even Chinese. It's here you realize another unexpected truth. Many of the yam workers weren't Mongols at all. The empire had absorbed people from every corner of Asia, and those with the right skills were recruited to keep the postal system running smoothly. In fact, some of the best station managers were from distant lands, brought in specifically for their expertise in logistics. You glance at a map pinned to the wall, a hand-drawn web of roads, rivers, and mountain passes, marked with tiny symbols representing the yam stations. The sheer scale of it is dizzying. From the shores of the Black Sea to the forests of Siberia, from the deserts of Central Asia to the bustling cities of China, the network stretches endlessly, like veins running through the body of the empire. And then comes another surprising detail, one you wouldn't expect in such a militaristic society. The Mongols offered protection to every rider on these roads, no matter their background. Robbing a courier or interfering with a yam post wasn't just frowned upon, it was punishable by death. Swift, brutal death. Even the most hardened bandits tended to think twice before messing with the yam. You watch as a group of armed guards patrols the perimeter, their hands resting casually on the hilts of their curved swords. They aren't here for decoration, they're a reminder that the message must get through. And here's the oddest thing you learned tonight. These stations weren't just for speed, they were surprisingly comfortable. Riders enjoyed hot meals, soft beds, and even medical care when needed. It's almost like a medieval version of a roadside inn, minus the neon signs and overpriced snacks. You sit by the fire for a moment, listening to the crackle of the flames and the soft murmur of voices around you. There's a strange peace here, tucked away in this hidden corner of the world, where strangers from across continents gather with a shared purpose. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the warmth and the rhythmic beat of distant hooves, you realize something. The yam wasn't just a postal service, it was the heartbeat of an empire. And with that quiet thought drifting through your mind, you rise once more, stepping back into the sunlight, ready to follow the road even farther. The wind tugs gently at your cloak, and somewhere in the distance another rider approaches, carrying yet another story just waiting to be told. You pull your cloak tighter as the afternoon breeze picks up, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and horse sweat from the station you've just left behind. The road stretches ahead once more, winding through gentle hills and open plains, always beckoning you forward. Your feet fall into a steady rhythm, and before long you can almost feel yourself becoming part of the endless flow of this ancient route. Soon you spot another rider in the distance, a lone figure galloping hard across the steppe. His movements are smooth, almost effortless, as if he and the horse were fused into one. You step aside to let him pass, and as he thunders by, you catch a glimpse of something strapped to his belt. A wooden tablet etched with strange symbols. Ah yes, the paisa. The paisa was no ordinary trinket. It was a badge of unimaginable authority, a sort of all-access pass for the Mongol postal system. Riders who carried a paisa were known as people of the arrow, and they had powers that would make even the most entitled modern traveller blush. As you continue walking, you imagine what it must have been like to hold such an item. A paisa allowed its bearer to requisition horses, demand food, and even commandeer local labour if necessary, all in the name of speed. Nobody could refuse them, not merchants, not local rulers, not even military commanders. If a rider flashed that tablet, the only acceptable response was immediate obedience. It's a bit like having a backstage pass that lets you skip every line at an amusement park, except instead of roller coasters, it's access to entire cities and armies. The paisa itself was a thing of beauty. Typically made from gold, silver, or iron, it was engraved with official seals and inscriptions, some of which read messages like, "By the power of eternal heaven, let this messenger pass unhindered." It was both a tool and a symbol of divine authority, linking the postal system directly to the Mongols' deeply spiritual worldview. And here's a quirky little fact. Some paisa tablets had holes drilled into them so they could be worn around the neck or hung from belts for quick access. You can almost picture a weary rider slumping off his horse after a long journey, casually flashing his pizza to a nervous innkeeper like a medieval VIP. You can't help but smirk at the thought. Imagine whipping out a shiny badge every time you wanted free room service. But the paisa wasn't just about convenience. It was also a serious responsibility. Riders entrusted with one had to adhere to strict codes of conduct. Abuse of the privilege wasn't tolerated, and there are records of riders being severely punished, or worse, if they misused their authority. After all, the Mongols valued discipline above almost everything else. As you wander along the path, you stumble upon an old stone marker partially hidden by tall grass. You brush away the dust to reveal a faded symbol that once marked the distance to the next station, proof that even centuries later, the remnants of this system still linger like ghostly fingerprints on the land. You pause for a moment, feeling the weight of history pressing down gently, and it dawns on you just how intricate the Yam network truly was. It wasn't merely about fast horses or fancy badges. It was a carefully engineered web of authority, obligation, and mutual reliance. Everyone along the route, from the humblest stable boy to the highest-ranking courier, played a role in keeping the system alive. And then there's this curious little detail. Some scholars believe that paisa privileges extended beyond just mail carriers. Certain diplomats, traders, and even traveling scholars were granted temporary paisa rights to ensure safe passage across Mongol lands. Suddenly, it wasn't just about delivering letters. It was about fostering diplomacy and trade on an unprecedented scale. You chuckle softly at the idea. Somewhere a medieval merchant probably bragged to his friends about scoring a paisa, as if he'd just been handed the keys to a luxury chariot. And yet, despite its prestige, the paisa remained a practical tool at heart. A passport, a badge, a guarantee of speed and safety. Without it, the wheels of the Mongol Empire would have turned far slower. You glance toward the horizon, where the road seems to melt into the sky, and you can almost see the flicker of distant riders, each carrying their own messages, their own burdens, their own tiny pieces of history. And with that quiet realization, you take another step forward, the wind whispering around you like a voice from the past, reminding you that every journey, even one as peculiar as this, has its own strange kind of magic. Tonight you follow their hoofbeats, deeper into the heart of an empire built not just on conquest but on communication. The sun dips lower as the shadows stretch long across the landscape, painting everything in soft shades of gold and amber. You continue along the trail, your steps crunching softly against the packed earth, when you hear it. Hoofbeats, fast and rhythmic, growing louder with every second. You turn just in time to see a rider barreling toward you at breakneck speed. He barely spares you a glance as he thunders past, his horse frothing at the mouth, its legs moving in a blur. And before you can even process what just happened, he's already a speck on the horizon, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. That right there is the secret to the Mongols' terrifying speed, their unrivaled technique of horse swapping. You continue walking, soon arriving at another yam station, smaller and simpler than the last. But what it lacks in grandeur, it makes up for in something far more crucial. Horses. Dozens of them, sleek and compact, tied to posts or grazing calmly in fenced-off areas. Their shaggy coats ripple in the wind, and their wide, intelligent eyes follow your every move. Here you witness firsthand how the Mongols turned the act of switching horses into a finely tuned art form. Riders would arrive in a cloud of dust, barely slowing down as they leapt from one horse to another. It was a dangerous maneuver, but they'd trained for this all their lives. Within moments they were off again, leaving their exhausted mounts behind to rest and recover. You watch in awe as a rider demonstrates the technique. He gallops in, leaps from his saddle mid-stride, and lands smoothly on the back of a fresh horse, never missing a beat. It's like watching a medieval action movie, except this wasn't entertainment. This was survival. And here's the astonishing part. With this method, Mongol couriers could cover up to 200 miles in a single day. 200 miles. That's roughly the distance between Paris and Brussels, covered without the benefit of cars, trains, or planes. Just grit, muscle, and determination. You can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. Today we complain if our emails take longer than a few seconds to send, but these riders would push themselves and their horses to the brink, all for the sake of delivering a message in record time. And yet it wasn't just about physical endurance. The Mongols knew exactly how far each horse could be pushed before it became a liability. Every station was equipped with carefully selected horses, bred for strength, stamina, and, above all, speed. They weren't the tallest or most elegant creatures, but they were astonishingly tough, able to endure the harsh conditions of the steppe. You overhear a stable hand explaining how each horse was fed a specific diet to maximize performance. Grains, grasses, and even fermented mare's milk for a little extra kick. Apparently, even the horses enjoyed a good drink after a hard day's work. But here's a fact that might surprise you. The Mongols didn't just use any horse for these journeys. They had specialized breeds for different terrains. Some suited for mountains, others for deserts, and some for icy river crossings. It was a postal service tailored to geography, long before anyone thought of GPS. As you watch the stable hands tending to the animals, you notice something else. Each horse has its own small leather tag, marked with a symbol indicating its designated route and station. It's a bit like luggage tags at an airport, except these tags came with hooves and a rather distinct personality. And in the middle of this organized chaos, you spot a ledger. A thick, worn book, recording every horse, every rider, and every message that passed through the station. The handwriting is neat but firm, a testament to the discipline required to manage such a vast operation. You flip through a few pages, your eyes widening at the details. Names of distant cities, notes on weather conditions, records of bandit activity along certain routes. It's like holding a slice of the empire in your hands. As the sun sinks lower, casting everything in deep orange and purple, you can't help but wonder about the riders themselves. How many nights had they spent under the same sky, their bodies aching from endless hours in the saddle, their minds focused solely on the next station, the next horse, the next urgent message? And somewhere in the back of your mind, you hear the familiar refrain. The historians still arguing, still debating the true extent of the Mongol postal network's speed. Some say the records were exaggerated. Others insist they were accurate down to the mile. As always, the truth lies somewhere between the hoofbeats and the dust. You glance back at the station one last time, watching as a fresh rider takes off into the distance, vanishing into the fading light. And as you follow the road once more, you realize that this wasn't just a delivery system. It was a relentless, roaring river of motion, fueled by determination, discipline, and just a little bit of fermented mare's milk. You smile to yourself, the breeze cool against your face, and you keep walking. There's still a long road ahead, and many more secrets to uncover. Night begins to settle gently over the plains as you continue walking, the sky darkening into soft shades of deep blue and violet. A thin sliver of the moon glows above, casting just enough light to illuminate the path ahead. The air grows cooler, and every sound seems sharper in the quiet. Your footsteps against the dirt, the occasional hoot of an owl, and faintly, the distant neighing of horses. Soon you spot another yam station up ahead, this one larger and surrounded by high wooden walls. Inside, there's a hive of quiet activity. The scent of wood smoke drifts through the air, mingling with the smell of leather and hay. You step through the gate, greeted by the sight of piles of supplies stacked neatly, barrels of grain, sacks of dried meat, and rows of harnesses hanging from wooden beams. It becomes clear to you rather quickly, this isn't just a relay post, it's a supply hub. You stroll through the station, watching workers methodically sort items into different piles. There are bags of oats for the horses, salted fish for the riders, spare saddles, weapons, and even jars of medicinal herbs. Everything here has a purpose, and nothing goes to waste. This is where you begin to understand just how vast and well-funded the yam system truly was. The Mongols didn't simply toss a few horses and riders onto the steppe and hope for the best. They invested heavily, stocking the relay stations with supplies, building stables, even maintaining repair workshops for saddles and wagons. And the numbers are astonishing. At its peak, the yam network had tens of thousands of horses stationed along its routes, with warehouses packed full of everything a courier might need to survive the harsh journeys ahead. Some stations were said to have stored enough supplies to feed entire armies for weeks. You chuckle softly, imagining the modern equivalent. It's like walking into a post office that also happens to be a supermarket, a gas station, a mechanic's garage, and a military barracks, all rolled into one. As you watch, a group of workers load supplies onto a small caravan of pack animals preparing to depart at first light. Their hands move quickly, expertly tying knots and securing bundles, their faces calm and focused. You overhear them discussing the weather, whether the rivers to the east are frozen yet, and if the snowdrifts near the mountains are passable. It's a reminder that the success of this entire network depended not just on speed, but on careful planning and local knowledge. And here's a curious fact. Some of the larger yam stations even kept falcons and hunting dogs on hand, not just for sport, but as a source of fresh meat for the station workers. You smile at the thought of a postal worker pausing mid-shift to hunt his dinner with a trained falcon. Only in the Mongol Empire. You notice too how strictly everything is documented. A clerk sits nearby, carefully writing in a ledger, recording every item that passes through the station. The Mongols were nothing if not meticulous. Every sack of grain, every horse, every scrap of cloth was tracked with near-obsessive precision. And it wasn't just material goods being monitored. Information too flowed through these supply hubs. Reports from distant governors, military updates, trade requests, all of it passed through here, sorted and forwarded with military efficiency. You begin to see the brilliance of it. The Mongols weren't just delivering mail, they were managing an entire ecosystem of logistics and intelligence. Every station doubled as a node in a vast web of surveillance and resource management. Some historians still debate the full extent of this system. Was it as smooth and seamless as the surviving records suggest? Or were there hidden inefficiencies and internal struggles, masked by the propaganda of imperial scribes? The debate lingers, like the smoke curling up from the station's chimneys. But as you stand there, watching the quiet dance of workers moving through their routines, it's hard not to be impressed. There's a sense of rhythm here, a calm determination that seems to echo through the walls. You can almost feel the heartbeat of the empire pulsing through this place. And as you leave the station behind, the wind picks up again, tugging at your cloak, carrying with it the faintest hint of spices, perhaps from some distant market along the route. You smile to yourself, knowing that you've just witnessed another layer of the Mongols' mastery. They didn't just conquer with swords and arrows, they conquered with logistics. And tonight, as the stars begin to shimmer overhead, you follow their path deeper into the web they so carefully wove. One step closer to the heart of an empire that never stopped moving. The stars scatter brightly across the velvet sky as you tread onward, the night growing cooler with every step. The path winds through gently rolling hills now, the soft hum of the wind accompanying your journey like a lullaby. Somewhere nearby you hear the distant howl of wolves, reminding you that these lands, though tamed by the Mongols, remain wild at heart. As you walk, the landscape shifts subtly. Rocky outcroppings jut from the earth, and the grass grows sparser, giving way to patches of hard-packed soil. It's here you begin to grasp the darker side of the Yam, the peril that lurked between the safety of the relay stations. You stumble upon the remnants of an old watchtower, its stones crumbling, half swallowed by creeping vines. Once this tower would have been manned by guards, watching for dangers that went far beyond weather or worn-out horses. This was bandit country. The Yam couriers were fast, astonishingly so, but their speed alone wasn't enough to guarantee safe passage. The steppes, mountains, and deserts they crossed were rife with threats. Thieves, rogue soldiers, and even rival clans eager to disrupt the Mongols' iron grip on communication. You imagine yourself as a courier, galloping through this lonely stretch of land, the moon your only companion, knowing full well that somewhere in the shadows, eyes might be watching. A sudden rustle of leaves, a glint of metal, and then an ambush. It's enough to send a shiver down your spine. But the Mongols weren't ones to leave their couriers unprotected. You soon learn that along the most dangerous routes, armed escorts were often dispatched to ride with the messengers. These weren't ordinary soldiers either. They were elite warriors, hand-picked for their skill and loyalty. And the laws protecting the Yam were notoriously harsh. If anyone dared to attack a postal rider or raid a relay station, the punishment was immediate and merciless. Often death by execution, sometimes extended to their entire family as a grim warning. You pause at the edge of a steep ravine, looking down into the darkened valley below, and you can almost hear the echoes of hoofbeats from centuries past, riders galloping furiously through the night, hearts pounding with adrenaline, hands gripping reins tightly as they prayed to outrun whatever danger lurked behind them. And here's an unsettling fact. Despite all the security measures, some couriers simply vanished, lost in storms, buried by avalanches, or taken by unseen hands in the night. Their letters never arrived, their names recorded in ledgers as missing. Some historians argue that the dangers of the Yam are often glossed over in official accounts, painting a picture of seamless efficiency that wasn't always true on the ground. Others point to tales of ghost riders, stories passed down by station keepers of messengers seen galloping through the night, faces pale as moonlight, vanishing before dawn. You smirk a little at that. Even the most practical systems can't entirely escape a bit of folklore. As you continue walking, you spot another marker by the roadside. This one carved with a strange symbol that once warned riders to remain vigilant. It's worn by centuries of wind and rain, but you can still make out the faint shape of a bow and arrow, crossed over a horse's hoofprint. It's a silent reminder. Speed alone wasn't enough here. Courage mattered too. You imagine the conversations that must have taken place around fires at relay stations. Riders swapping tales of near escapes, close calls with bandits, or strange lights seen flickering on distant hills. They would laugh, boast, and share their fears, knowing full well that each journey was a gamble. And yet they kept riding. You glance up at the stars once more, the constellations sparkling like ancient watchmen in the sky, and you feel a quiet admiration for those forgotten couriers. They weren't just mailmen. They were adventurers, braving not only the vastness of the empire, but also the darker edges of human nature. And as the path continues forward, winding toward the next unseen horizon, you find yourself walking a little faster, your heartbeat steady, your thoughts lingering on those who rode before you. Because in this empire of speed and silence, danger was always just one heartbeat away. And tonight you've stepped directly into their world, one hoofbeat at a time. Dawn begins to break again as you continue along the winding route, the horizon blooming with soft hues of peach and rose. The wind carries the scent of grass and distant campfires, and somewhere ahead you hear the quiet snort of horses stirring. Before long you arrive at another station, but this one feels different. There's something almost reverent about it. You step through the wooden gate and your eyes widen at the sight of the horses tethered within the enclosures. These aren't just any animals. No, these are the prized Mongol horses, the true engines of the yam. At first glance you might not think much of them. They're small, stocky, and a little scruffy looking, nothing like the towering war horses you might expect from stories of knights and grand battles. But here, among the couriers and stable hands, these creatures are treated like royalty. You watch as a groom carefully brushes down a chestnut mare, murmuring softly in a language you don't quite understand. Another feeds fermented mare's milk to a stallion, its nostrils flaring with delight. And here's where it gets fascinating. These Mongol horses weren't bred for beauty. They were bred for survival. Tough, agile, and almost ridiculously hardy. These horses could travel long distances with minimal food and water. They could navigate treacherous terrain, rocky hills, icy rivers, scorching deserts, with the same ease that most animals would stroll through a meadow. In fact, some say that a Mongol horse could survive on nothing but frozen grass, scraped from under layers of snow. A feat that sounds more like a myth until you see their thick, woolly winter coats up close. You move closer, admiring their sturdy legs and broad hooves, built perfectly for gripping the slippery ground. It's no wonder they were nicknamed the tanks of the steppe. They weren't fast in the way we think of speed today, but they were relentless. And here's a fact you weren't expecting. Mongol riders often carried multiple horses with them, switching mounts several times a day to prevent exhaustion. One horse might gallop for 20 miles before being swapped out for another, waiting patiently at a station like this one. In some cases, couriers manage strings of 5 or 6 horses at once, rotating them in a carefully calculated pattern to maximize both speed and endurance. You imagine what it must have felt like, racing across the open steppe, knowing you had a fresh mount waiting ahead, like having backup batteries for your legs. But these horses weren't just transportation. They were also a source of sustenance. You learn that riders regularly drank their horses' milk, and in extreme situations they could even make a small incision in a horse's vein to drink its blood for emergency nutrition. carefully, of course, so as not to harm the animal permanently. It sounds shocking, but out here, far from markets and cities, survival sometimes demanded such measures. The horses weren't merely beasts of burden. They were companions, lifelines, and extensions of the riders themselves. You chuckle softly, imagining the shocked faces of modern city dwellers, hearing that their medieval delivery service ran on horse milk and occasional blood sips. As you walk through the stables, you notice something else. Each horse has a small carved wooden tag around its neck, marked with symbols indicating its route, stamina rating, and even its preferred terrain. It's astonishingly methodical, like an ancient version of tracking numbers for parcels. And there's more. Each station kept careful breeding records, ensuring that only the strongest, most adaptable horses were bred for yam duty. Bloodlines were guarded fiercely, with some horses carrying family lineage histories longer than those of many noble clans. You pause beside one particularly regal-looking stallion, its coat a shimmering grey, and wonder how many miles its ancestors must have travelled, how many messages they carried across mountains and deserts. The station master, an elderly man with weathered hands and a soft voice, tells you a story about one legendary horse said to have run non-stop for nearly 250 miles in a single day, saving an entire city by delivering urgent orders in time. Historians still debate whether it really happened. But then again, the Mongols had a way of making the impossible seem routine. You smile at the tale, realizing that no matter how much we modern folks pride ourselves on speed, our cars, planes, and instant messages, we'll never quite match the raw physical connection between these riders and their horses. The sun climbs higher now, bathing everything in soft golden light. The horses snort and shuffle, eager for the day's work ahead, and as you step back onto the path, leaving the station behind, you feel a quiet respect lingering in your chest, not just for the couriers, but for the sturdy little horses that carried the Empire's heartbeat in their hooves. Because without them, the yam wouldn't have existed. Without them, the Mongol Empire might have crumbled before it ever reached its peak. And as the wind picks up again, carrying the scent of hay and leather, you walk on, following the trail of hoofprints that stretch endlessly into the horizon. The sun hangs high now, casting sharp shadows along the winding path as you press forward. The land around you shifts again, flatter now, wide and open, with grass stretching endlessly in every direction. The vastness is dizzying, and you can almost feel how it must have overwhelmed travellers unaccustomed to the steppes' sheer immensity. Soon you approach another yam station, its wooden walls weathered but sturdy. This one feels different from the others, more fortified, with thick gates and higher watchtowers. As you step inside, it becomes clear why. This was no ordinary pit stop. This was a legal checkpoint, the place where the strict laws of the yam came into full force. Inside, everything moves with a quiet, disciplined air. Clerks sit behind long tables reviewing documents, and scribes carefully record the names of every rider passing through. You watch as a courier presents his paisa, holding it up with the practiced ease of someone who's done this 100 times before. The clerk inspects it closely, his eyes sharp, scanning the symbols and verifying the authority it grants. Once satisfied, he nods and waves the rider through, jotting a note in a thick ledger before returning his gaze to the next person in line. You soon learn just how seriously the Mongols treated this process. Violating the rules of the yam wasn't a matter of a simple fine or a slap on the wrist. It was often a death sentence. If someone interfered with a courier, whether by delaying them, refusing supplies, or, heaven forbid, attacking them, the punishment was swift and absolute. Executions weren't just common for such crimes, they were expected. You hear a station keeper muttering to another worker about an old case, his voice low but clear enough to catch. A merchant once tried to bribe a courier for early access to trade news, an act the Mongols considered tantamount to treason. The merchant and his entire caravan vanished soon after. No trial, no appeal. The message was clear. The mail must go through. You chuckle darkly at the thought. Imagine explaining that level of dedication to a modern postal worker. Deliver this package, or else. But it wasn't all fear and punishment. The strict enforcement of Yam laws also came with remarkable protections for those who obeyed the system. Couriers could ride without fear of local bandits or corrupt officials. No one dared stand in their way. They were untouchable, living embodiments of imperial will. And here's a strange little fact. The laws even covered property damage. If a courier's horse trampled a farmer's field during an urgent delivery, the farmer would be reimbursed by the state. But the rider remained blameless. The message took precedence over everything. You begin to see the cleverness of this approach. The Mongols weren't just enforcing rules. They were weaving an entire legal framework around speed and efficiency, ensuring that every citizen, from the humblest farmer to the richest merchant, understood the stakes. You pass a wall covered in official decrees, their faded script still legible in places. Most are written in classical Mongolian, but you spot translations in Chinese, Persian, and other languages. Another reminder of the empire's sprawling diversity. And then you hear it, another whispered debate among the station workers. Some argue that the laws were too harsh, too rigid, and that they may have driven many local populations to quietly resent the system, even as they complied outwardly. Others insist that without such severity, the Yam would have collapsed under its own weight, lost to corruption and inefficiency. Historians still argue about this, of course. Did the Mongol legal system enable the Yam's success, or did it sow the seeds of eventual rebellion beneath the surface? No one agrees entirely, but here, standing among the dusty ledgers and watchful guards, it's hard to ignore how effective it was. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of the rules and expectations that once pressed down on every rider who passed through these gates. Obey the law. Respect the courier. Prioritize the message. Simple rules, but enforced with the full might of the empire. You watch as another rider prepares to depart, his paisa returned, his saddlebags loaded with scrolls and sealed letters. He swings onto his horse with practiced ease and gallops off without a backward glance. And you realize something else, something subtle but deeply true. This wasn't just about moving information. It was about power. The power to dictate what mattered, to control where attention was focused, to decide which voices were heard and which were silenced. And as you leave the checkpoint behind, stepping once more onto the open road, you can almost feel the lingering tension in the air. The unspoken understanding that every hoofbeat carried not just a message, but a command. A reminder that, in the Mongol Empire, communication wasn't just a tool. It was an act of dominion. And tonight, as the wind picks up and the shadows lengthen, you follow their trail. Deeper into this quiet, relentless machinery of empire, where even the softest whisper could ripple across continents. The wind shifts again as you move farther along the path, the air growing lighter, crisper, carrying with it the scent of pine from distant forests and something else. A faint, almost metallic tang. You soon spot another relay station nestled near a river crossing, its wooden buildings perched beside the glistening waters, reflecting the sunlight like shards of glass. But this station holds something different. As you draw closer, you notice a set of locked chests, heavily guarded, each marked with strange symbols. The station workers move with extra caution, speaking in hushed tones. There's a palpable sense of secrecy here. Curiosity tugs at you, and before long, you discover the hidden layer of the yam most people never saw. The world of encrypted messages and classified mail. While the Mongols were famed for their speed, they were equally obsessed with security. Not every letter carried mundane trade reports or military orders. Some were far more delicate and far more dangerous. These locked chests contained messages encoded with primitive forms of cryptography, an early version of secret writing designed to protect the most sensitive information. The Empire's top couriers, those deemed utterly loyal, were entrusted with such deliveries, tasked with ensuring that no one, not even other yam workers, could glimpse their contents. You can almost imagine the pressure of carrying such a letter, knowing that it might contain the fate of an entire city or the marching orders for an army lying in wait. The Mongols employed various methods to guard these secrets. Some messages were written in obscure dialects, known only to select officials. Others were coated with special wax or wrapped in layers of silk to hide them from prying eyes. In some cases, messages were split into separate pieces and sent by multiple riders along different routes, ensuring that even if one was captured, the full message would remain incomplete. And here's a peculiar detail that makes you pause. Some historians claim the Mongols even used code words that disguised the names of cities and individuals within their letters. Entire military campaigns could be coordinated under veils of misleading terms, like a medieval version of code names in spy thrillers. You watch as a scribe seals a scroll with red wax, pressing an intricate stamp into it, a symbol of a snarling wolf wrapped in vines. That seal, you're told, designates it as strictly confidential. Only specific hands may open it, and woe to anyone who tries without permission. The station master, a stern woman with sharp eyes, shows you a locked iron box secured with leather straps and metal rings. She tells you this box contains messages bound for the great Khan himself, reports from distant governors, military commanders, and spies embedded in foreign courts. And just to make sure nothing went wrong, certain couriers carried personal letters marked with a terrifying clause. If the message did not arrive, the courier's life was forfeit. No excuses. You feel a shiver run through you. Imagine being the poor soul tasked with carrying such a letter, riding through storms, bandit-infested passes, or war zones, knowing that both your life and your honor hinged on this fragile bundle of paper and wax. It makes modern email security look a little underwhelming. As the station workers bustle around you, carefully packing and sorting the messages, you notice how none of them linger too long near the locked chest. There's a quiet respect in the air, a reverence for the power these letters hold. And once again, the historians' debates creep in like a whisper on the wind. Some argue that the Mongols' secret communications were exaggerated in later records, embellished to enhance the mystique of their empire. Others point to surviving documents that clearly show the use of encrypted orders and diplomatic ciphers. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between myth and fact. But standing here, watching the deliberate, almost ritualistic process of sealing these messages, you have little doubt that secrecy was woven into the very fabric of the yam. You can't help but admire it, in a strange way. The Mongols weren't just racing against time, they were outwitting anyone who dared intercept them. And as you watch a courier ride off, a leather pouch of coded letters strapped tightly to his saddle, you feel the weight of the invisible threads that once stretched across continents, delicate, intricate, but unbreakable. Messages hidden within messages, secrets layered within every hoofbeat, and tonight as the road carries you forward once more, you follow those hidden trails, stepping deeper into the shadows of an empire where speed wasn't enough, where trust was everything, and even the wind itself seemed to speak in code. The sun begins its slow descent once more, casting the world in a golden glow as you continue your steady march along the ancient route. The plains stretch endlessly ahead, but now the road feels different beneath your feet, more defined, more worn, as though thousands of hoofbeats had carved it deeper into the earth. Before long you crest a hill, and the view nearly steals your breath away. Stretching before you, like threads spun across the world itself, is the vast web of the Yam, marked by distant stations, winding roads, and clusters of tiny settlements that hug the routes. From this vantage point you can truly see it, the Mongol network sprawling across the land, far beyond what you could have imagined. It's humbling really to realize just how immense this system was. You start walking again, descending the hill toward the next station, passing groups of traders, merchants, and travelers along the way. They're a curious mix, some wearing the thick, layered robes of Central Asia, others clad in silk garments from China or rough wool tunics from Eastern Europe. And that's when it hits you. This network wasn't just for the empire's officials or soldiers. It was open to merchants too. You arrive at a bustling station filled with more than just couriers and horses. Traders haggle over goods, children chase each other through the dusty courtyard, and cooks stir pots of rich spice stews that fill the air with warmth and hunger. The Yam wasn't just a mail system, it was the lifeblood of commerce. You watch as bundles of silk, porcelain, spices, and even exotic animals change hands, all under the watchful eye of the station clerks, who meticulously log every item. The couriers still come and go, of course, but now they're sharing space with camels loaded with goods, wagons creaking under the weight of trade supplies, and merchants eager to capitalize on the safety and speed the Yam provided. It's oddly comforting to think about. In a world often defined by conquest and violence, here was a system that didn't just connect armies, it connected markets too. And here's the peculiar part. The Mongols actively encouraged this commercial use of the Yam. They knew that wealth flowing through the empire strengthened their rule, so they allowed merchants to use the postal roads, sometimes even granting them special paisa licenses to speed their goods along. You chuckle softly at the thought. Imagine your local postal service doubling as a luxury trade highway. Of course, this wasn't free. Merchants paid fees, sometimes hefty ones, for the privilege of using the Yam, but most were more than happy to pay, knowing it meant faster, safer passage across treacherous lands. You sit down by the station's hearth, listening to the chatter around you. Stories swirl through the air, tales of silk caravans reaching Europe in half the usual time, of rare spices arriving in bustling cities before they even ran out in the east, of fortunes made simply by riding the Yam's currents. And naturally there's another debate among the station's travellers. Some praise the system, saying it turned the Mongol Empire into a trading paradise, where goods moved with unprecedented speed. Others grumble about the fees, the taxes, the way local markets sometimes suffered, because outside merchants flooded the region with cheaper wares. Historians still argue over this too. Was the Yam an economic miracle or a double-edged sword? Did it lift regions out of poverty or crush local industries under the weight of empire-wide competition? But sitting here watching merchants from every corner of the known world share bread and laughter under the Mongol banners, it's hard to deny the magic of it all. You imagine the journeys these people have taken, the mountains crossed, the deserts endured, the countless nights spent under strange stars. And yet here they are, brought together by the humblest of tools, a network of roads, horses, and relay posts. The station master, a cheerful man with a beard like spun silver, tells you that some of the busiest Yam routes rivaled the great cities in wealth. Entire towns sprang up around the stations, catering to the constant flow of couriers and merchants alike. Inns, bathhouses, even entertainment troupes followed the roads, creating bustling hubs of life in places that had once been desolate. And then, as the sun finally slips below the horizon, you watch a merchant caravan prepare to depart, their camels swaying under the weight of precious cargo. The riders gather, adjusting their saddles and tightening straps, ready to follow the well-worn path through the night. You realize that this was the true genius of the yam, not just a mail service or a military asset, but a vast living artery, carrying not only messages and supplies, but dreams, ambitions, and livelihoods. And as you rise to follow the road once more, you feel the pulse of that ancient commerce beneath your feet, still echoing faintly after all these centuries. The empire wasn't built by swords alone, it was also built by merchants, and their remarkably well-connected horses. And tonight you follow their trail, deeper into the ever-weaving tapestry of roads, trade, and the strange, relentless hum of history in motion. The night deepens as you leave the bustling station behind, the distant chatter of merchants fading into the wind. The road ahead glows under the soft light of the moon, and you continue walking, your footsteps in quiet rhythm with the ancient pulse of the yam. But before long, you notice something unusual. Alongside the road, there are curious markers, small piles of stones stacked deliberately, each topped with scraps of cloth fluttering in the breeze. Some are faded to pale threads, others newer, still vibrant with colour. You pause drawn to these strange little towers and soon learn they're ovu, sacred stone cairns erected by Mongol travellers. And here, far from the clamour of the trade stations, you step into another hidden layer of the yam, its spiritual heart. Despite their fierce reputation, the Mongols were deeply spiritual people, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the natural world. The ovu were more than mere markers. They were offerings to the spirits of the land, asking for safe passage and protection along the treacherous roads. You watch as a lone rider dismounts near an ovu, circling it 3 times while tossing small stones onto the pile. A quiet ritual to appease the spirits of the mountains, rivers, and winds. There's a serene beauty to it, this act of reverence amidst the starkness of the steppe. As you continue along the road, you realize these markers are everywhere, standing silently near mountain passes, guarding river crossings, perched atop hills that seem to watch over the travelers below. It's a reminder that the yam wasn't merely a system of logistics and trade, it was also woven deeply into the spiritual fabric of the Mongol world. You pass a small shrine tucked beside the road, its wooden frame adorned with carved wolves and falcons, symbols of protection and hunting prowess. A flickering oil lamp burns inside, tended by a solitary monk wrapped in thick robes. He nods at you as you pass, his presence both calming and humbling. And here's a curious fact. Many yam stations had their own shrines, often dedicated to Tengri, the eternal blue sky, the supreme deity of the Mongols. Riders would pause to offer prayers before embarking on dangerous journeys, leaving small tokens, coins, food, or locks of hair as gestures of devotion. You pause to imagine it, a weary courier, pausing before dawn, kneeling beneath the stars, whispering a prayer for swift hooves and clear skies, the weight of empire resting on their shoulders. It's strange, isn't it, how even the most practical systems still leave room for the unseen. And here's something even more intriguing. Some scholars suggest that the Mongols believed certain roads were cursed or inhabited by malevolent spirits. Extra precautions were taken on these routes, additional offerings, protective amulets, and even specific chants meant to ward off misfortune. You can almost picture it, riders galloping through moonlit passes, clutching talismans close, muttering words passed down by shamans, their eyes flicking nervously to the shadows beyond the firelight. And despite their hardened exteriors, many riders believed deeply in these protections. To them, surviving the Yam wasn't just about speed or stamina. It was also about maintaining harmony with the world around them. As you climb a ridge, overlooking a vast stretch of road winding like a silver ribbon below, you spot more ovu scattered along the route, their cloth flags fluttering softly like whispers to the heavens. It's humbling to think about how many hands have added stones to these piles, how many prayers have been carried away by the wind. You take a small stone from the ground, rolling it between your fingers, and after a quiet moment, you place it gently atop the nearest ovu, following the ancient custom. A silent promise of respect to those who travelled before you. As you continue walking, the landscape grows quieter, the only sound the soft swish of grass against your legs, and the distant rhythmic beat of hoofprints carried by the wind. And you begin to understand something deeper about the Yam. It wasn't just a network of stations and horses. It was a thread that wove together every part of Mongol life, trade, war, faith, and fate, binding them all along the same endless roads. And tonight, as the moon watches overhead, you follow that thread, letting it guide you deeper into the heart of a world where every step was a prayer, every mile a leap of faith, and every rider both messenger and pilgrim on the long winding path across the empire. The night air grows cooler as you descend from the ridge, the road ahead stretching out under a canopy of glittering stars. You pull your cloak tighter and continue walking, your breath curling in soft wisps. The landscape is quiet now, almost dreamlike, and your mind drifts back to the riders who once travelled this very path. Soon you approach a station unlike any other you've encountered so far. This one is larger, fortified not just with walls, but with towers and thick gates. Lanterns flicker from its windows, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The scent of ink, parchment, and melted wax drifts through the air. You've arrived at an administrative hub, a place where the messages themselves became as important as the roads they travelled on. Inside, scribes work by lamplight, hunched over scrolls and ledgers, their quills scratching rhythmically. They don't even glance up as you step inside. Their focus is absolute. These are the record keepers, the quiet architects of the Mongol communication machine. Here, you discover an aspect of the Yam that few outside the empire ever saw. Its role as a vast archive, a central nervous system of intelligence. You wander through the halls lined with shelves, stacked high with scrolls and bound books, some bearing seals in wax, others marked with cords of silk. These aren't just letters, they are detailed reports, tax records, census lists, military inventories, trade statistics, even weather observations. And here's something that surprises you. The Mongols kept remarkably detailed demographic records. They knew who lived where, how much they produced, what taxes they owed, and even the kinds of animals they kept. The Yam wasn't just about delivering messages, it was a tool of surveillance. You listen as one scribe explains how every province had to submit regular reports, which were copied and forwarded along the Yam routes, eventually arriving at the capital. From there, decisions could be made swiftly, adjusting taxes, moving troops, or redistributing supplies as needed. It's chilling in a way, this realization that centuries before the modern world, the Mongols had already created an administrative network that could rival today's bureaucracies in scope and precision. And here's a detail that makes you pause. They even tracked the performance of Yam couriers themselves. Every delay, every lost letter, every failed delivery, it was all recorded, analysed and judged. You can almost feel the pressure weighing on the shoulders of every rider, knowing that somewhere in a dimly lit hall like this, a scribe was tallying their successes and failures with merciless precision. But it wasn't all about control. As you move through the rooms, you discover that the yam also preserved more than just numbers. There are scrolls filled with poetry, philosophical debates, even translations of foreign scientific works, Greek, Arabic, Chinese, and more, collected and shared across the empire. You run your fingers along the edge of a rolled manuscript, its pages filled with delicate calligraphy and intricate illustrations of stars and mechanical devices. Knowledge, it seems, travelled just as swiftly as soldiers and traders. One elderly scribe, his beard long and white, leans in to tell you a story. He speaks of how scholars from Persia, China, and the Islamic world were invited to Mongol courts to exchange ideas, their works copied and sent along the yam to distant corners of the empire. He chuckles softly, noting that while the riders galloped through wind and snow, the ideas they carried moved even faster, changing minds, reshaping cities, and quietly binding the world closer together. You can't help but smile at the image. Somewhere in a far-off city, a farmer receives an order for seeds based on agricultural experiments conducted thousands of miles away. Elsewhere, a physician treats a patient using techniques learned from a manuscript that crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers thanks to the same network that carried tax reports and battle orders. And once again, the historian's whispers creep in. Some debate whether this intellectual exchange was as widespread as later chroniclers claimed. Others argue it laid the groundwork for many scientific and cultural advancements that followed in later centuries. But standing here, surrounded by stacks of scrolls, you can feel the quiet hum of truth beneath it all. The yam wasn't just a highway for empires, it was a bridge for knowledge, a web that stretched across cultures, languages, and faiths, connecting people not just through trade or war, but through curiosity and shared wisdom. And as you step back out into the cool night, you glance up at the stars once more, wondering how many of the maps, stories, and ideas you've encountered tonight were shaped by the hands of those unseen scribes. You smile softly, knowing that you're following more than just a trail of hoofprints now. You're walking along the echoes of conversations that once travelled faster than the wind. Conversations that, in their own quiet way, shape the world. And tonight you follow those whispers deeper still, into the heart of an empire that knew the power of both words and roads, and wove them together into something that could endure long after the hoofbeats had faded. The moon has climbed high into the night sky by the time you leave the station behind, its silvery glow bathing the steppe in a quiet, otherworldly light. The landscape around you feels hushed now, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. You walk on, the soft crunch of your footsteps the only sound as you follow the winding path. But soon in the distance you see it, movement slow and deliberate, lit by the faint flicker of lanterns. You've stumbled upon a caravan, one unlike any you've seen before. As you approach, you realize that this is no merchant train or courier relay. These are diplomats, their banners marked with unfamiliar symbols, their guards clad in fine armor. Their horses carry not just goods, but gifts. Silks, precious metals, lacquered boxes, and even exotic animals, their eyes gleaming in the dark. This is another role of the yam that many never knew existed. It wasn't just for mail or trade, it was the highway of diplomacy. You watch from a distance as the diplomats confer quietly by the fire, their words soft, their faces calm but focused. You can almost hear the weight of their conversations, negotiations that could sway kingdoms, end wars, or spark new alliances. The Mongols mastered the art of diplomacy as thoroughly as they did warfare. While their armies were known for brutal conquests, their diplomatic missions were equally legendary for their speed, scale, and impact. You soon learn that the yam was essential to this strategy. By providing protected routes and relay stations, the Mongols could dispatch envoys across the vast expanse of their empire, and far beyond it, with unmatched efficiency. These envoys carried not just letters, but entire diplomatic entourages, moving swiftly and safely across lands that might otherwise be hostile. And here's a curious fact. Many of these envoys were multilingual, capable of switching between Persian, Mongolian, Chinese, Arabic, and even Latin as needed. They weren't merely messengers, they were bridges between worlds. You sit nearby, listening as the caravan's translator recounts tales of far-off courts. He speaks of meetings with sultans and kings, of delicate negotiations sealed over shared cups of fermented mare's milk, and of contracts signed in languages few could read, but all were bound to obey. And then he laughs softly, telling of the peculiar gifts exchanged on these journeys. Giraffes sent to astonished rulers in Persia, intricately crafted clocks gifted to Khans, even a chessboard said to be carved from jade and gold, travelling the yam under heavy guard. You can't help but smile at the sheer strangeness of it all. Imagine riding across deserts and mountains only to deliver an animal that most people have never even heard of, let alone seen. But beyond the exotic oddities, there's a deeper layer to it. These diplomatic missions weren't merely about gifts or treaties, they were about information. Every envoy returned with detailed reports, the state of foreign economies, the disposition of their armies, the strength of their cities, and the mood of their people. And every scrap of this intelligence flowed back through the yam, feeding into the empire's ever-watchful gaze. It's no wonder, then, that some historians suggest the Mongols knew more about their neighbours than their neighbours knew about themselves. You watch as the diplomats retire for the night, their guards settling into shifts around the camp's edges, their horses resting under blankets embroidered with symbols of rank. And you realise something subtle but profound. While the Mongols may have conquered with swords and bows, they maintained their dominance just as often through words and negotiations, travelling the same roads used by merchants and couriers, but carrying far weightier burdens. The yam wasn't merely a postal service. It was a diplomatic artery, carrying the heartbeat of empire-to-empire conversations. Sometimes tense, sometimes generous, but always calculated. You linger a moment longer, watching the flames flicker and die down to glowing embers, the soft murmur of foreign tongues blending with the sigh of the wind. And as you rise to continue your walk, you can't help but think how strange it is that the fate of entire nations once hinged on the speed of a horse, the endurance of a rider, and the quiet certainty of a road stretching endlessly through the night. You leave the camp behind, your footsteps light, your thoughts heavy with the echoes of ancient diplomacy, knowing that somewhere along this very path, history itself was carried in satchels, negotiated in tents, and sealed with a simple nod. And tonight you follow those shadows even deeper, tracing the quiet power of an empire that ruled as much by paper and parchment as by steel and arrow. Morning's first light begins to creep across the horizon, soft and pale, casting long shadows over the endless plains. The chill lingers in the air as you continue your journey, your footsteps steady along the well-worn path. The night's quiet diplomacy feels like a distant dream now, replaced by a growing awareness of the sheer enormity of the network you've been walking. Ahead you see another relay station, this one bustling with unusual activity. Dozens of couriers and workers are gathered here, their voices raised in excitement as they crowd around something in the centre of the courtyard. Curious, you approach, and your breath catches slightly at the sight. Before you stands a massive map stretched across a wooden frame, its surface covered with intricate lines, symbols, and delicate brushstrokes. It isn't just a work of art, it's a living, breathing chart of the Mongol communication network. This is where the vastness of the Yam becomes fully visible. You watch as a scribe traces a line along one of the roads with a brush, carefully updating the map to reflect newly opened routes or repaired stations. Others take notes, recording details of terrain changes, seasonal flooding, or new construction projects. Everything is documented, everything mapped. You lean in and marvel at the detail. Rivers snake across the parchment, mountain passes are clearly marked, and cities glimmer as tiny gold dots. The Yam roads crisscross the empire like veins, branching out in every direction, into Persia, China, Russia, India, and even parts of Europe. It's overwhelming to see the sheer scale laid out before you, but it's also beautiful in a way. This delicate, orderly web stretched across such a chaotic world. And here's something even more astonishing. Some of these maps were copied and distributed to key officials throughout the empire, allowing governors and military leaders to plan campaigns, trade, or diplomatic missions with incredible precision. You realize then that this wasn't just about moving messages quickly, it was about mastery of geography. The Mongols weren't merely conquerors of land, they were conquerors of space itself. You overhear one of the station masters explaining how the Yam was designed to adapt constantly. When rivers shifted, stations were relocated. When lands became impassable in winter, alternate routes were opened. There was no rigid, fixed path. It was always changing, always evolving. And here's a strange little fact. Some stations even maintained weather logs, recording winds, rainfall, and snow depths to better predict travel conditions for future riders. A medieval form of meteorology, you might say. You pause to watch the station workers pin coloured flags onto different points on the map, each marking areas of caution, mudslides, bandit activity, or political unrest. It's oddly reminiscent of modern traffic reports or airline control towers. And once again you hear the whispers of historians arguing through the corridors of time. Some say these maps were exaggerated, idealized versions of the empire's reach, propaganda tools to intimidate enemies and reassure subjects. Others insist they were precise, functional instruments of administration, their accuracy proven by surviving records and archaeological discoveries. Either way, there's no denying the impact. Standing here, surrounded by riders and scribes bent over this sprawling masterpiece, you can almost feel the hum of something greater than yourself, an entire empire woven together by lines on a map and the pounding of hooves along distant roads. You chuckle softly, thinking of how far ahead of their time they truly were. Today we rely on GPS satellites and digital maps, but the Mongols had their own living network of human guides, weather watchers, and cartographers, working together to tame the vastness of their world. You watch as a group of couriers studies the map before setting off on their assigned routes, their faces calm but determined. They know the road ahead, the risks and the responsibilities, and yet they ride on without hesitation, their paths already written in ink and dust. And as you prepare to leave the station behind, you take one last glance at the map, letting your eyes trace the roads stretching endlessly across the parchment. It's strange, you think, how something so fragile, lines on paper, scratches on leather, could control armies, govern trade, and decide the fate of empires. But perhaps that's the true magic of it all. Not the horses, not the riders, not even the speed, but the knowledge of where to go and how to get there. And tonight, as the sun rises higher and the roads beckon once more, you follow that same quiet magic deeper still, drawn onward by the invisible lines that once stitched together the largest empire the world has ever known. The sun now casts its full warmth upon the steppe as you leave the cartographer's station behind. Your steps light, but your mind heavy with all you've witnessed. The roads ahead seem to stretch even farther than before, their paths no longer just physical tracks in the earth, but threads of an intricate design. A design that once shaped continents. As you walk, the air grows drier, the grass sparser. Soon the landscape shifts again, becoming rugged and rocky, the terrain carved by ancient rivers and winds. It's here, amid these harsher lands, that you discover another surprising truth about the yam. This wasn't merely a system for messengers and merchants. It was also an instrument of empire building, used to transport settlers, labourers, and entire communities. Ahead you spot a camp being dismantled. Dozens of people are packing their belongings onto carts pulled by oxen and horses. Their faces are weathered, their clothing practical and sturdy. They're migrants, moving to distant lands under orders from the Khan. You approach quietly, listening as they speak of their destination, farmlands along the edges of the empire, where new settlements are needed to secure the borders and provide supplies for the military. And here it becomes clear. The yam didn't just move letters, it moved people. The Mongols understood that communication alone couldn't hold an empire together. They needed bodies on the land, farmers, craftsmen, herders, and builders, to fortify their conquests and transform them into lasting dominions. And the yam became their highway for such movements. Entire villages were uprooted and relocated along its routes. Some willingly accepted the offer, lured by promises of land, freedom from taxes, or protection under imperial law. Others were less enthusiastic, relocated as part of military strategies to control rebellious regions or populate newly conquered territories. You watch as a family loads their cart with bundles of tools, pots, and grain seeds, their faces a mix of resignation and cautious hope. And here's a fascinating detail. Some of these settlers weren't Mongols at all. The empire often relocated skilled artisans, doctors, engineers, and scholars from conquered cities, Persians, Chinese, Russians, and others, dispersing their knowledge throughout the realm. It wasn't just population control, it was a deliberate effort to spread technology and expertise. One elderly man near the edge of the camp tells you his story. He's a potter from the distant west, brought here not by force but by an imperial order granting him land and supplies in exchange for teaching his craft to local communities. He chuckles softly, saying that while his village may have changed, the clay beneath his hands always feels the same. It's a reminder that beneath the politics and policies, life always finds its rhythm. You observe the yam workers assisting the migrants, offering maps, providing spare animals, even coordinating food deliveries along the way. Everything is meticulously organized, with checkpoints ensuring that the settlers move efficiently and safely toward their new homes. And once again, you can hear the ongoing debate among scholars echoing in your mind. Some argue that this resettlement system was one of the most effective tools of Mongol governance, spreading cultures, stabilizing regions, and creating new economic hubs. Others criticize it as imperial overreach, stripping people from their homes and using them as pawns in a grand political game. But here, on the ground, watching the caravan of settlers slowly roll out along the dusty road, it feels more complex than either version. You see resilience in their faces, yes, but also acceptance, pragmatism, and surprisingly even optimism. In a strange way, the yam offered them something few other empires could at the time: safe passage to a new beginning, however uncertain it might be. And as you watch the caravan disappear into the shimmering heat of the horizon, you feel a deep respect for those who journeyed not for conquest or profit, but simply for survival. The yam, it seems, carried more than letters and goods. It carried entire lives. And as you continue your walk, the path feels heavier beneath your feet, weighted with the footsteps of countless others who travelled before you, their fates intertwined with the vast, unrelenting machine of an empire that never stopped moving. Tonight you follow that same path, deeper still into the quiet power of a system that could uproot villages, reshape nations, and somehow still leave room for the quiet hopes of those who simply wanted to build something new. The sun begins its slow descent once more, casting long slanted shadows across the hills as you press onward. The road grows quieter here. No caravans, no bustling stations. Only the soft murmur of the wind as it weaves through the dry grass. The yam's pulse slows, but it hasn't vanished entirely. It lingers beneath your feet, humming faintly as if the earth itself remembers. Soon you come upon something unexpected, nestled in the hollow of a small valley, half hidden by overgrown shrubs and moss-covered stones, lies the crumbled remains of what was once a grand relay station. Its walls are mostly collapsed now, the roof long gone, but the foundations remain, thick, sturdy, built to last. You step carefully over fallen beams and scattered stones, walking through the ruins of what was once a vital stop along the Empire's arteries. This was once a yam station, but now it's a relic. Here, among the ruins, you feel the quiet weight of time pressing down, as if every stone carries the echoes of hoofbeats, hurried footsteps, and whispered conversations. This was once a place of urgency, of movement, of life. And now it's silent. You wander through the remnants of what had been stables, kitchens, sleeping quarters, even a small shrine tucked into a corner, its walls still faintly bearing traces of painted symbols, blue skies, hunting birds, and the eternal knot of fate. You pause in the centre of the old courtyard, standing where couriers once exchanged horses, where merchants once bartered for supplies, where riders once caught their breath before plunging back onto the roads. It's humbling, really, to see the inevitable fate that awaits even the most powerful systems. And yet, even in decay, there's a certain beauty here. You find yourself wondering about the station's final days. Did it fall to neglect, abandoned as the Empire shrank and fractured? Was it simply bypassed by newer routes, left to crumble as the winds shifted and trade moved elsewhere? Or perhaps it was destroyed by invaders, witness to some forgotten skirmish in the long twilight of the Mongol Empire. The historians still debate these ruins, of course. Some say they represent the slow, natural decline of a system stretched too thin over too many lands. Others argue they mark deliberate destruction, symbols of rebellion against foreign rule. But standing here, with the golden evening light spilling through broken arches and onto the dusty ground, you sense a quieter truth. Nothing lasts forever. Not empires, not networks, not even roads carved deep into the earth. And yet here it still stands, weathered, yes, but not entirely erased. You trace your fingers along a stone wall, feeling the grooves where hands once pressed, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in exhaustion. The yam may have fallen, but its traces remain, etched into the land, into memory, into the stories passed down by those who still follow its ghostly paths. And here's something even more fascinating. In some parts of Central Asia, local shepherds and villagers still tell tales of the yam. They speak of hidden tunnels beneath the earth, secret passages connecting forgotten stations, and ghostly riders who still gallop under the moonlight, delivering messages long overdue. You smile at the thought, how history and legend intertwine, blurring the lines between fact and fable. Perhaps it doesn't matter whether those stories are true. Perhaps what matters is that people still remember. You gather a small stone from the courtyard, smooth, worn, likely touched by countless hands before yours, and tuck it into your pocket. A small, quiet keepsake from a place where history once thundered loudly. As you leave the ruins behind, the shadows stretch longer, and the first stars begin to prick the darkening sky. You glance back one last time, watching the old station fade into the evening mist. And in that quiet, you realize something profound. Though the yam itself has crumbled, the idea it carried, the drive to connect, to communicate, to move across impossible distances, has never vanished. It simply takes new forms. Tonight, as you step back onto the road, you carry that truth with you, following the faint echoes of a forgotten station, walking the same path where once, long ago, an empire's heartbeat raced beneath the hooves of 1,000 horses. The night air grows cooler as you continue walking, the path winding gently through hills now bathed in soft moonlight. There's a stillness to this stretch of the road, a kind of calm that settles deep into your bones. You move slowly, your footsteps quiet, as though the land itself is inviting you to listen more closely. And before long you arrive at a place that feels different. This is no relay station, no merchant outpost, no diplomatic camp. It's a memorial. A tall stone stele rises from the ground, carved with intricate symbols and faded script. Around it, smaller stones encircle the monument, each bearing the marks of weather, time, and reverence. You step closer, running your fingers along the rough surface, tracing the worn inscriptions. This place honors the couriers of the yam, those who rode farther than anyone, faster than anyone, and often paid the ultimate price for it. You stand in silence, imagining those riders, their faces lined with sun and wind, their hands scarred from rains and frost, their bodies shaped by the constant strain of the road. They weren't kings or generals. They were ordinary people tasked with extraordinary duties. And here's the humbling truth. Many of them never returned. The yam was not for the faint of heart. Riders faced bandits, avalanches, swollen rivers, and blizzards. Some vanished in sandstorms that swallowed entire caravans. Others perished crossing frozen mountain passes, their bodies lost beneath snow until spring thawed the earth once more. Yet despite these dangers, they kept riding. You listen to the wind swirling around the monument, and in it you can almost hear the faint beat of hoof prints, the soft whisper of leather against saddle, the sharp whistle of a courier urging their horse onward. And here's something few people realize. The Mongol Empire, brutal as it could be, revered these couriers. They weren't just disposable tools, they were honored servants of the state. Some even received land, titles, or positions of respect upon retirement, provided they survived long enough to claim them. You chuckle softly at the thought of a weary courier finally settling down after years of relentless riding, enjoying a quiet farm somewhere far from the roar of hoofbeats, sipping tea by a hearth, perhaps still waking up at night from dreams of galloping endlessly toward the horizon. But it wasn't just honor they left behind. Their stories lived on too. Folk tales began to circulate, celebrating the daring feats of legendary riders. Songs were sung of those who crossed entire kingdoms in a single week, defying death and exhaustion alike. Some riders became mythical figures, half human, half spirit, believed to ride forever across the night sky, their horses' hooves sparking stars as they galloped. You pause, letting that image settle in your mind, an endless procession of ghostly riders streaking across the heavens, still carrying messages for an empire that has long since turned to dust. And once again, you hear the debates of historians murmuring like distant echoes. Some argue that these stories are just exaggerations, born from nostalgia and romanticism. Others insist they reflect a deeper truth. The yam wasn't merely a communication network. It was a symbol of sacrifice, duty, and endurance. But standing here beneath the quiet shimmer of stars, the argument feels irrelevant, because whether those riders were saints or simply stubborn, their legacy remains etched into the earth, into the wind, and into every stone piled around this monument. You kneel down, picking up a small rock from the circle surrounding the stele. Following the old custom, you place it gently atop the mound, an offering, a gesture of respect for those who came before. And as you rise to your feet, you feel it again, that deep, unspoken connection to the countless feet and hooves that once pressed along this same path, always moving forward, always chasing the horizon. The road beckons once more. And tonight, as you step back into its embrace, you carry with you not just the stories of an empire, but the quiet, enduring heartbeat of every rider who dared to race against the limits of the world, and sometimes even against the limits of time itself. You walk on, deeper still into the final stretch of this journey, guided now by something quieter, slower, but no less powerful than the pounding of hooves: memory. The road narrows now, winding gently through low hills, brushed with silver under the glow of the moon. The air has grown still, the night wrapping around you like a soft, familiar cloak. Each step you take feels slower, more deliberate, as though the land itself is urging you to savor these final moments of the journey. Ahead, you spot a small structure, simple, humble, barely more than a wooden shelter tucked beside the path. There's no bustle here, no couriers rushing through or guards standing watch. Just a quiet bench beneath an awning, and an old man sitting there, his face lined with years and his eyes sharp, watching the horizon. You sit beside him without a word, feeling the stillness settle between you. For a long while, neither of you speaks. You both simply sit, listening to the faint rustle of grass and the distant call of an owl. Then at last he speaks, his voice soft and low, but steady. He tells you that this was once the very last station on the edge of the empire, a place where the yam ended, and beyond which the world belonged to no one and everyone at once. This was where messengers turned back, where soldiers hesitated to cross, and where maps once simply faded into blank parchment. You glance out at the land beyond the station, and indeed it feels different. Wilder, untamed. A reminder that even the greatest empires have edges they dare not cross. The old man continues, speaking of his younger days, when he too rode with the yam. He tells you of nights spent racing through snowstorms so fierce the stars vanished, of deserts where the wind howled like wolves and the sun burned holes in your vision, of rivers crossed by sheer force of will and horses that collapsed after giving every last breath. And yet despite it all he smiles, not with pride but with quiet fondness. Out here, we weren't just carrying messages. We were carrying the Empire's heartbeat. You sit in silence, letting the weight of those words settle, because now, after all you've seen, you understand exactly what he means. The yam wasn't simply a network of roads and horses. It wasn't just a tool of trade, diplomacy, or war. It was a living thing, an extension of the Mongol Empire's very breath. Every hoofbeat was its pulse, every message its voice, every station a resting lung in the long exhale across the world. And just like every living thing, it had a beginning and an end. You watch as the old man closes his eyes, his breathing slow and even, as though he too is fading into the rhythms of this ancient road. Around you the night grows softer, the wind gentler, the stars more distant. And then you realize This is the end of your journey too. You rise, stepping off the bench, glancing once more at the open land beyond. There's something comforting about knowing that even the greatest roads eventually give way to quiet paths unknown. You turn back, giving a small nod to the old man, who smiles without opening his eyes. And as you take your first step away from the station, away from the yam, you feel lighter, as though you've left behind not just miles, but centuries. The road fades behind you, the whispers of hoofbeats and voices now little more than memories carried by the breeze. And in this quiet you realize something beautiful. The empire may have vanished, the roads may have crumbled, but the stories remain. Still traveling, still connecting, still alive. You take a deep breath, letting the stillness settle around you like a soft, familiar quilt. And with that, you close your eyes, allowing yourself to drift away on the gentle winds of history, letting every hoofbeat, every whispered message, and every quiet mile lull you into peaceful rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.